Nobody can stop them. They're having their way with America. They want our guns. And if you're not with them, cops and military, then you will declare that you're with the Republic now. And don't tell me that I'm a weirdo because I'm upset about this, and I should only go get upset about my favorite football team winning or losing. Listen, I know what tyranny means. I know the bankers are putting poison in our food and water. I know the bankers have stolen $8.5 trillion. I know we're under War Powers Act. I know they're hurting us. I know they're carrying out New World Order. I know they staged those terror attacks. You know what it's like to gut up to this and go out every day and go past the peer pressure and come out day one and say 9/11 was an inside job and lose most of the radio stations I was on. You know what it's like to go to sleep every night knowing you work for a bunch of psychotic killers and you bastards are probably going to end up killing me one day. You know what it's like knowing you've ruined my life. You know what it's like, you sons of bitches. I'm tired of your crap. You commit evil, you're part of an evil system, and we're standing up against you. And the Republic is going to defeat you in the end. Some of us won't make it personally through this, but a lot of us are. And in the end, you are going to be brought to justice. You're not invincible, and God is going to deal with you. And you are cursed to hell. I'm done. I got to get out of here.
Awake Radio, giving you the info you need without the screaming rant. awakeradio.us, awakeradio.co.uk.
Okay, we're here.
Can you get that?
Organic news here on Awake Radio this Tuesday, November 18th. I can't say that I actually haven't ranted like Alex Jones has, because I have quite often, but I guess I save it for privacy. But I don't know, maybe we should start ranting that way. Ray McGOVERN is back. Thank you for being able to be with us again, Ray, former CIA analyst.
Most welcome, Kat.
I'm having you back on again so quickly because you're going to be back in New York, the scene of the crime, this Saturday for an event called End America's Blindness, Restore Its Vision, Open the 28 Pages. It's dedicated to President John F. Kennedy and the victims and families of 9/11. It's going to be held again this Saturday, November the 22nd, starting at 2 p.m., going until 5 p.m. at the All Souls Church, 1157 Lexington Avenue, corner of 80th Street and Lexington, with a donation suggestion of $10. Speakers include Mr. Ray McGOVERN, retired CIA analyst, co-founder of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, the Surveillance Pseudo-State, released the 28 pages. Also speaking is going to be Ramsey Clark, United States Attorney General from 1967 to 1969. Global war is over if you want it. Next speaker, Jeffrey Steinberg, Senior Editor, Executive Intelligence Review, the Eris Principle, the BRICS nations revived JFK's New Frontier. And the BRICS, that's a kind of an abbreviation for the countries that are for releasing these 28 pages. Is that correct, Ray?
Yeah, actually, it's a much bigger deal than that, Catherine. These are the folks: Brazil, India, Russia, South Africa, China. These are people who are really trying to create an alternative to the domination of the U.S. and Western Europe. They're well on their way to creating that kind of alternative, but they also are interested in releasing these the information that might tell us what went on 9/11.
Right. So this Saturday, there's going to be this event, and it's going to be about releasing these 28 pages from the 9/11 Commission that George W. Bush had removed. And why did he have them removed?
Well, that's what we're trying to find out. People need to realize that there has been no honest investigation of 9/11 to date. So what are we talking? We're talking, 13 years.
And that raises suspicion right there.
Well, it sure does. And the way things have been orchestrated, the establishment did not even want to investigate this seminal event, this watershed event in human history, really. You've heard several times people say, well, you can complete the sentence here. After 9/11, everything changed, right? The Bill of Rights, the Constitution, our concept of whether you can start a war on no evidence at all or perjured evidence. So what I'm saying here is that that is a scandal that this thing has not been investigated appropriately, and it raises all manner of suspicions. Now, the 28 pages were in the first attempt at investigating. It was a half-hearted attempt. Cheney, when he was vice president, vigorously objected to any investigation at all. Actually, he called Tom Daschle, the Speaker of the House, there, and he said, "Look, if you run some kind of investigation, we're not going to let you have government witnesses." Well, that changed slightly when there was great pressure for a 9/11 commission, and in that respect, Dick Cheney thought, well, there's probably more merit in me picking the people who will investigate this. And so he picked the Republican stalwart, Porter Goss, who was head of the intelligence community in the House, and the ineffable and ineffectual Bob Graham, senator from Florida, who led the Senate Intelligence Committee. And he said, you guys go at it and pick a executive director and, look into it. Now, Porter Goss famously said right at the outset, he said, now, we're not interested in looking backward. What does that remind you of? We like to improve the system. We're just going to look forward. What the heck kind of investigation are you going to run if you're not going to look backward, all right? So the die was already cast. Bob Graham was a feckless player in all this. He was trying to run for president. That's all he cared about. And so he let Porter Goss do all manner of extracurricular and unconstitutional things, one of which I remember distinctly. There was a leak from the Congress to some newspaper, and Vice President Cheney called up Goss and Graham and said, "This is unacceptable. I'm sending the FBI to investigate you people in Congress." Now, there is such a thing, or used to be, as a separation of powers. Never in my 51 years here in Washington have I seen, the FBI sicked on senators and representatives in our Congress, but that's what happened. What did Goss and what did Bob Graham say? Oh, okay, if you think that's necessary. And so they began lie detecting these guys. And finally somebody said, wait a second, this is a gross violation. That's how the thing went. It also took about 3 or 4 months to find an executive director for the commission. Now, when it all ended, and there were actually no public hearings until the very end, when it all ended, the executive director of the commission got up and she said, now look, you have to realize before we conduct this final hearing that we discussed this dispute with the White House well into last night, but the White House would not relent. And so what you are getting is only part of the picture. Anything that relates to President Bush or Vice President Cheney's involvement in this thing has been banned from the report. Even if it's already in the press, it's banned from the report. Now, that took a lot of guts to get up and warn the people that this thing was a feckless exercise, but she did. And the thing was feckless. And what resulted from it was that the families of those who perished in 9/11 were so outraged that they created successful pressure in the Congress for what they called an independent investigation. Now,
it's quite obvious, obviously, to the families of the victims of 9/11. I mean, you know when someone is not on your side. It's not, complicated for them to know that their own government is not even on their side.
Well, it took not very long for the families to realize that the composition of the commission itself indicated that the commission was not going to be on their side. If their side was to get at the truth, the commission was farce number 2. There were, I think, 10 members. All of them were either politicians or lawyers. Many of them were both. Now, maybe I'm showing a little disrespect for the legal profession or for politicians, but if you want to make a case that the 9/11 Commission was representative of those who perished on 9/11, forget about it. It was not. It was all establishment figures, and they were deprived of the necessary information and the time to make a cogent judgment as to what happened. Now, let me just say that this is not just McGovern speaking. When Lee Hamilton, the Democrat that they trot out as sort of Democratic representative for these kinds of commissions, and the former senator from New Jersey, took over the commission. Kane was his name. They issued this report. It was widely acclaimed as a literary masterpiece. It was beautifully bound, available in paperback for $10. Everybody applauded. And it took them 4 years to write their own book in which they said, we were set up to fail. And we were not given enough time. We were not given enough money. We were not given enough access to classified information. And so we were set up to fail. Well, isn't that neat? The co-chairman of the 9/11 Commission, Governor Kane from New Jersey, and Lee Hamilton from Indiana, previous congressman, are telling us 4 or 5 years after the beautifully bound 9/11 report came out that it was a crock, as we say in the Bronx. It was a crock, and so the 9/11 Commission did not fulfill its duty, and the families are justifiably very upset.
Sounds like the Warren Commission.
Yeah, when you think of all the things that happen that are unexplained, things that cry out for honest analysis, it is truly an outrage. For example, when people are looking into these questions, and they get onto something good, like these 28 pages that were removed at George Bush's direction, they're called, they're marginalized by being called conspiracy theorists. Well, that really hackles up the back of my neck. They're not conspiracy theorists. They're just trying to find out what went on. Unlike...
So he's calling people in the 9/11 Commission conspiracy theorists in the 28 pages?
No, please don't misunderstand. I guess I wasn't clear enough. What happens when people question whether these investigations were honest and thorough, they are called conspiracy theorists. Right. People who want to get to the bottom, especially people in my native New York who have a special interest in this. They want to find out what really happened. Yeah. So there are lots of speculative theories that this was an inside job. And there's a lot of evidence that would point in that direction. And people say to me, Catherine, they say, well, Ray, don't you believe that Dick Cheney is capable of doing such things? And I say, of course I believe that. I watch Cheney very closely. But I don't do faith-based intelligence, okay?
Right.
What matters to me is the empirical record. And there are very, very many very troubling aspects of things that were not looked into, but I'm not yet convinced that that empirical record is enough to justify the conclusion that this was in toto an inside job. What's the alternative explanation? Well, it may strain credulity on the part of people who haven't worked in the federal bureaucracy, but as my good friend Colleen Rowley from the FBI points out, you really have to have worked in the bureaucracy to realize what potential there is for monumental screw-ups across the board, in the FBI, at NSA, in the CIA, and intramural rivalries that prevent sharing of one by one organ of government with the other. So, in my view, the jury is out. What I need to emphasize is that there has been no investigation. If the co-chairs of the 9/11 Commission admit, as they did in their book, that they weren't given enough time, enough money, or enough access to sensitive information, and that's why they were, quote, set up to fail, end quote. Well, we as Americans have a right to better than that. And what we need is an independent inquiry, and I don't know how that comes about, but we have to tie up these loose ends.
Right.
Now, one of the things that gives me great pause is that NSA knew about these two characters in San Diego. NSA knew about them, CIA knew about them, and we are asked to believe that neither told the FBI about them, and that they were allowed to communicate with their Al-Qaeda representatives in Yemen 7 times. And then people say, well, it was just metadata. Well, it wasn't just metadata. It was content. And then the president gets up a couple months ago and says, oh, if we only had the telephone number of those hijackers in San Diego. And Bill Binney, who is the technical director of NSA for many years, points out, Mr. President, do you know about caller ID? Mr. President, it's that simple. So, bottom line, we had the number of those fellows in San Diego. We had the content of the telephone calls. The head of the National Terrorist Center said there were 7. There are probably more telephone calls between San Diego and the central, the network or telecommunications center there and safe house there in Yemen, the Al-Qaeda one. And so NSA knew enough to prevent 9/11. Now, not only NSA, but CIA knew enough about these fellows out there in San Diego. They were tracking them for over a year.
I mean, it's amazing that they have no problem, finding the information of innocent people when they want to and spying on innocent people.
They're real good at that, yeah.
I mean, how is that?
Well, that feeds suggestions that there was more than a simple malfeasance or a misfeasance here. For example,
I mean, by spying on innocent people, I mean, it's kind of funny. It's like they're trying to show the masses that they're doing something and that they care about their safety, but by spying on innocent people but when it comes to like looking at guilty people or suspects, they can't find the number or they can't find the content.
Well, they did have, the president was lying through his teeth, or else maybe NSA never told him that they had the number in San Diego. Now, CIA knew about these two folks. One was named Hazmi and the other Midar. They knew all about them. And guess what? Guess who helped set them up there in San Diego? The Saudis.
Oh,
now, do you think it's irregular that people might want to see those 28 pages that were pulled out of the joint congressional inquiry on 9/11? because they related to the Saudi involvement. Everybody recognizes that. And many congressmen now have seen those 28 pages and have read them. Walter Jones, for example, of North Carolina. They all say there's nothing in there that merits it being kept secret. Right. It needs to be out. Now, why is it kept secret? Well, I'm afraid that it reveals more about the Saudi involvement and probably about the White House involvement, since Prince Bandar was considered part of the Bush family, since Prince Bandar was photographed with the president the day after 9/11, and since the only people allowed to fly out of the United States for that first day or two were Saudi nationals, I mean, this needs to get out. And so if the congressional people who have seen this report and have read those 28 pages, if they say that it does not merit the classification and merit being prevented from U.S. citizens from seeing it or the world from seeing it, then it should be released. Now, what this is symptomatic of, Catherine, is something really, really dangerous, and that is the subservience of the congressional body, the subservience of this organ of government, this branch of government, Congress, to the executive. The executive says, no, it's classified. And Congress says, oh, darn, you know? And it's just so...
They don't challenge them. They
Yeah,
like we're you know, they have the nerve to just question them, to challenge them, to call them on their stuff.
Well, we're going to see a good example of whether it's possible for a senator, for example, to step out and do the right thing. I'm thinking of Mark Udall. Now, he's on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and the reference here is to the voluminous report that took 5 years to investigate, which tells chapter and verse about CIA and torture and names names, okay? Now, that has been prevented from being available to the rest of us because of a very, very disreputable dance between John Brennan, the head of the CIA, Dianne Feinstein, until January, the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, who used to be at the top of John Brennan's dance card until Brennan stepped all over her feet by investigating and cracking into her staff's computers. And the third here in this ménage à trois is a fellow named Obama. And they have this sort of pantomime going along. Dianne Feinstein said, I need to have the report. I want to release the report. And so Brennan gives her the report, and he can't even, he redacts all the nouns from the sentences, okay? And Feinstein says, this won't do any good. And she gives it back to the president. She tells John Brennan not to redact all the nouns, maybe some of the verbs, but not all the nouns. And so he gives it back to John Brennan, and John Brennan works with it some more. Meanwhile, John Brennan invites who? Previous CIA directors, all complicit in the torture. I'm talking about Porter Goss, Michael Hayden, right, and George Tenet. They've all been invited into the CIA headquarters to help John Brennan redact the report. Now, are we ever going to see that report? Well, it's been a long time. It's like waiting for Godot. And once the Senate changes, I think the chances we'll ever see any, unless somebody leaks it. Now, that's why I mentioned Mark Udall. He was defeated. He was a senator from Colorado. He lost in the last election. Now, what does that mean? That means that he has a time frame of between now and January to do the right thing. And what's the right thing? The right thing is to release that report on CIA spying.
I mean, do we know what happened to the original 28 pages? I mean, I'm sure there's copies of it everywhere.
Yeah, well, actually, I'm on a different kind of thing here. Now, this is torture. We're talking about, well, let's get back to 9/11 in just a second. The example here was whether or not subservience will win the day again with respect to Mark Udall, who can simply get up on the Senate floor read the report, commit it to the congressional record, and let us all know who it was. Was John Brennan one of the people who approved torture? Well, if he wasn't, then why was he on the distribution list for all the memos, for all the emails? You know, in intelligence work, there's such a thing as a need to know. And when you're talking about approving torture, you can imagine how you want to restrict dissemination of these emails or whatever. And John Brennan was on those distribution, and he said, "Oh, I didn't have anything to do with it." Well, is that why it's not being released? Anyhow, Udall has a matter of conscience before him. Will he just tuck tail, go back to Colorado, and hope to run for the Senate again 2 more years and not violate any of the rules of the establishment? Or will he use his immunity on the floor of the Senate to reveal what's in that torture report? Now, it's anybody's guess what he'll do. Most people are saying, well, he'll be no more courageous than Bob Graham or anybody else. They won't do that. They won't do that because that would get them marginalized from the Brotherhood. Okay? Now, back to the 28 pages. The same thing is true. Bob Graham could have stood on the Senate floor and said, look, the president says we can't release these 28 pages. I'm releasing them now on my own authority, and I have immunity from prosecution because I'm standing in the well of the Senate. He could have done that. So could Dick Durbin. So could any of them. And they don't do it because they're so scared. Yeah. And when I started on this tangent, just demonstrating that, you know, it's so bad that after the attack on Iraq and after things went south really quickly, Dick Durbin, you know, not a bad guy, moderate senator from Illinois. What he allowed is how he knew lots of stuff before the attack on Iraq. He knew about the very flimsy, if any, evidence on weapons of mass destruction, but they told him it was secret, and so he couldn't tell the people of this country the real story. Well, give me a break. Or is Congress so subservient to the executive? Has it come to that kind of pass that the executive could say, no, you can't say anything because it's secret? Well, that's where we are now. Mark Udall has a chance to break that in a good way. I hope he does it. I give him an even chance of doing it, actually.
Well, I mentioned to you about Lieutenant General Daniel Bolger that was on Democracy Now! Last Wednesday, talking about his book, Why We Lost
the
War in Iraq. And I mean, he admitted in speaking, you know, to Amy Goodman about, you know, his own failures, like he's actually admitting it, you know, that he's concerned about his own, you know, just things that he's done wrong. And he talked about just, of arrogance that, you know, the military and the U.S. government just kind of having a certain, he used the word arrogance, and he actually referred to, you know, alcoholics and 12-step, you know, programs and things like that, which, you know, ultimately everything comes down to. But there's this clip that she played of Richard Clarke admitting that George W. Bush perhaps should be held against, you know, for war crimes. And I was just going to play the clip of Richard Clarke saying that. There's actually 2 clips, so I'm just going to play it.
In June, we spoke to Richard Clarke, the nation's top former counterterrorism official. He said he believes George W. Bush is guilty of war crimes for launching the 2003 invasion of Iraq. He served as national coordinator for the security and counterterrorism during Bush's first year in office. He resigned in 2003 following the Iraq invasion. This is a part of his response whether George Bush should be held on war crimes, should be tried for war crimes.
I think things that they authorized probably fall within the area of war crimes. Whether that would be productive or not, I think is a discussion we could all have. When we have established procedures now with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, where people who take actions as serving presidents or prime ministers of countries have been indicted and have been tried. So the precedent is there to do that sort of thing.
Richard Clarke went on to say that when President George Bush had wanted him to place the blame for 9/11 on Iraq.
I resigned, quit the government altogether, testified before congressional committees and before the 9/11 Commission, wrote a book revealing what the Bush administration had and had not done to stop 9/11, what they did after the fact. How the president wanted me after the fact to blame Iraq for the 9/11 attack.
So he says right there, like, what Bush knew that could have prevented 9/11, like those were his words, so insinuating that they did know something beforehand.
Well, again, Catherine, there was plenty of evidence out there. Whether it was brought to the president's attention in such a way as for him to say, well, all right, don't tell me any more about that. I know all about that stuff because we're running this operation. That evidence is lacking. There is a lot of evidence of very loose ends. And what Richard Clarke is addressing here is something very, very important. He's one of the folks that is a real pro, and he has principles, and he's an honest man. I don't know how he lasted so long with the Bush administration, but he was the counterterrorism advisor. And on the very evening of 9/11, and I get this out of Richard Clarke's own book, George Bush and Cheney went down into the White House shelter, really, the shelter against attack, and they brought with them Donald Rumsfeld and George Tenet, the head of the CIA, and a couple other folks. Okay, now, according to Clarke, what happened was this. Someone said, okay, now we can go and get Iraq. And one of the people said, well, actually, it would be kind of against international law to strike Iraq since they really didn't have anything to do with what happened earlier today. And George Bush said, again, according to Clarke, I don't care what the international lawyers say, we're going to kick some ass. Okay? Now, why do I mention that? I mention that because that set the tone of the whole thing. And the next evening, what Richard Clarke and his people witnessed was a president roaming around in the basement of the White House alone in the Situation Room. And he sees Clarke and he says, come on in here, come on in here. And Clarke says, yes, sir. And they go into this little room and the president says, was it Saddam? Was it Saddam Hussein that did yesterday? And Clarke confesses to being completely nonplussed. And he says, well, Mr. President, we told you yesterday that it was Al-Qaeda, that Iraq had nothing to do with it. He said, well, you look at it. You take another look at this. You look at the. By that time, other people had come into the room, and he said, I know you're busy now, but you take another look and make sure you find out about whether there were ties between Saddam Hussein and what happened yesterday. All right, and he leaves. One of Richard Clarke's workers, so a woman, comes into the room, and she looks at her colleagues staring with open mouths, and she says, what just happened here? And what just happened there, of course, was President Bush trying to tell an honest man, namely Richard Clarke, to find evidence, in quotes, that Saddam Hussein was involved in 9/11. Now, they told the mass media the same kind of thing, and when the Iraq War started, 69% of the American people believed that Saddam Hussein had something to do with 9/11. It was a masterpiece of PR, of propaganda, and it all started with George Bush. So, now, was there a reason to attack Iraq? No, certainly no 9/11 reason. Did they have weapons of mass destruction? No, they did not.
Oh,
Were there
right.
ties between Iraq and Al-Qaeda? No, there were not. And so,
I was just
what
saying,
happened?
it just really quickly. Did you happen to kind of catch the clip of the officer who just passed away, Thomas Young, watching the clips of George W. Bush making fun of, weapons of mass destruction, and at a presentation that he gave, and everyone was kind of joking and laughing about it while he's like looking under desks and saying, "Oh, no weapons of mass destruction under there," and the poor disabled veteran who just passed away going over there under the pretext of weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah. Well, that was particularly despicable and a mark of the man, George Bush, making light of the fact that many people had died because of his deceit. But with respect to war crimes, we had a war called World War II. And after that war, there was a Nuremberg tribunal. And many of the Nazis, the people who were responsible for the war, were executed. Not only that, but the tribunal defined what a war of aggression is, and this is what the tribunal said. A war of aggression is the supreme international crime, differing from other war crimes only insofar as it contains the accumulated evil of the whole, period. End quote. Accumulated evil? Think lies. Think false pretexts. Think torture. Think kidnapping. Think black prisons sprinkled out around the world. And you've got accumulated evil. So there's no doubt in the mind of any legal scholar or anyone who has taken the trouble to read the Nuremberg tribunal proceedings that what George Bush and Dick Cheney did was launch a war of aggression, the supreme international crime. And the reason Nuremberg defined it that way was to prevent it from ever happening again, after which the UN was set up, and there were distinct criteria. Before you could attack another country, there had to be an imminent threat to your own country, or you had to get permission from the UN Security Council. The U.S. could not get permission from the UN Security Council. There was no imminent threat, so Bush and Cheney did it anyway. Talk about a war crime, that's a war crime par excellence.
And it's amazing, how they just get away with it, and it's been going on for this long. And I know we've talked about this the last time you were on, but if you can just kind of reiterate, why did they want to go into Iraq?
Well, that was the big question very early on, and on a long trip to Alaska where I had a speaking engagement, I came across an acronym that I thought fit the bill. OIL, okay? O for oil,
right?
I for Israel, and L for logistics, namely the permanent military bases that we coveted in Iraq. Now, oil, the acronym was deliberately fashioned so it would say oil, but it meant those other things too, Israel and logistics. I ran into real trouble with Jon Stewart because he mockingly said, McGOVERN, you're violating the rules for acronyms. You can't have an acronym that really spells out what you really mean. Oil, you can't do that. It was great. And my children who watch Jon Stewart more religiously than I do, they said, Dad, tune in. It was wonderful because those were the reasons. Oil, obvious. Anybody who thinks that an attack on Iraq had nothing to do with oil is, not worth, I beg to differ with them. Now, Israel, the Israelis were cheerleading for us to do that. And logistics, we had lost the military bases in Saudi Arabia. We wanted them in Iraq, and everything that Bush and Cheney did subsequent to the invasion showed that that's what they were really hankering after.
What about Syria? I mean, is it the same thing in Syria?
Well, Syria is much more complicated sort of thing. But again, on the Syrian front, the Israeli aspect is even more important. You see, when the troubles began in earnest in Syria, you had Shia and Sunni at loggerheads with each other. Not only in Syria, mind you, but throughout that part of the Middle East. Sunni and Shia killing each other off. Now, Jody Ruderin, Jerusalem, actually, Israeli office chief for the New York Times, asked prominent Israeli officials, well, what's your preferred outcome for the conflict in Syria? And a couple of them said, Jody, our preferred outcome is no outcome. And she said, I beg your pardon? I said, yeah, no outcome, because as long as Shia and Sunni are killing each other off, they can't turn their guns on us, let them kill each other off. So let's keep the thing going. Now that's why a year and a half ago, the Israelis very much wanted, and the neocons in this country very much wanted us to get involved militarily. Why? Because Assad was beginning to win. He was beginning to drive out these rebels from the positions they had occupied years before. And so what was the solution? Well, get the U.S. militarily involved, then you're sure that the rebels can't lose, and you keep the violence going.
Right. So, so that's pretty much like the theme in Afghanistan, and like every other place, that they want to keep the violence going.
They want to keep the U.S. engaged, that's for sure. And as long as the violence doesn't touch Israel, then, as I say, they admitted no outcome. Let them kill each other off. Now, the problem with ISIS, or ISIL, or whatever you want to call it, is that they're not just 10,000. They're not just 15,000. They're probably closer to 100,000 fighters. And each territory they take over, they have a willing new group of fresh recruits. Now, why do I mention that? Because they are a threat now, not only to the rest of Iraq, Baghdad included, remember where you heard it first, huh? And Jordan. And what's on the other side of Jordan? Israel. And so now it's a sort of a Frankenstein that has grown out of proportion. And now what are we doing? Well, we're doing Iraq number 2, revisited Iraq. Okay, we're going to put more troops in. It makes no sense at all unless we're doing this to oblige those people in that part of the world that otherwise need U.S. support. What we should do is pull out of there, let them fight it out, and then they'll come to terms, and there's nothing we can do now except to make that situation worse, and that's precisely what we're doing. The only people that profit from that are the arms makers, the arms sellers and manufacturers, and the generals that like to get an extra star in their lapel.
And that's what Daniel Bolger had admitted, that the local people are the ones that need to, deal with things and work things out, and that the troops, American troops, they need to, even just at least gradually pull out. So he admitted that himself.
Yeah, when will we ever learn? They ought to make a song about that. Oh, way to go. We go, when will they ever learn? Okay, now, there was something called...
Voice.
What's that?
You have a good voice.
When will they ever learn? Okay.
You should sing at the event on Saturday.
Oh, I intend to, yeah. Now, Vietnam...
We just have like 5 more minutes left,
okay.
Right?
We didn't learn anything from Vietnam.
But it seems like they really don't want to learn, as long as the people are making money, as long as people's careers are being made. Like your question that you were going to pose to Petraeus addresses this very issue, that we want to challenge the fact that, these people, they're not getting their stars and stripes legitimately. And that was kind of what your question to Petraeus was going to be when you got arrested a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, there are very narrow interests involved here. Barack Obama doesn't want to lose a war. The generals want to fight wars, and so do the colonels, because that's the way they get promoted. The arms manufacturers, you want to know a good deal here, Catherine. Let me explain. this spring, the highly polished, well-trained, incredibly well-equipped Iraqi army, 4 divisions worth, were in northern Iraq. What happened? This ragtag group, ISIL, shot a couple of AK-47 rounds in their direction, and what did these 4 Iraqi divisions do? They ran away. They ran away south. What did they leave behind them? All these fancy tanks and artillery and armored personnel carriers and all the rest of it. Who is going to scoop them up? ISIL. And so what did the U.S. do? Obviously, you can't let ISIL get these weapons, and so we fighter bombed them to destroy all the weapons that we had given to the Iraqi army to the tune of $4.5 billion. Okay? Now, is that an awful waste? Well, no, because now we can manufacture and sell still more weapons to the new Iraqi government. And man, if you is this a great country or what? It's a great cycle for the arms manufacturers and the generals, not for the rest of us, and particularly not for the poverty draft that people call a volunteer army.
And also in Ferguson, I mean, they just called out the National Guard, because they're going to release the verdict any day now on the verdict on Officer Wilson. So that they're all gearing up for a war.
Yeah, it looks pretty clear what that verdict's going to be, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, exactly. They do whatever they want, and then the people have no rights.
Yeah.
And then if the people don't like it, they get criminalized.
And so what you have here is a preventive, what we did with respect to Iraq was a preventive war, which is ipso facto illegal. And now we're doing preventive war in Ferguson and St. Louis. Colleen Raleigh, very early on in her second letter to the FBI director, said, look, Mr. Director, what's going to happen is these tactics, these preventive tactics, are going to come home to roost here in our country, and the rather rational and benign attitude of local police forces is going to change. Instead of having probable cause, they're just going to prevent anything from happening by rounding up everyone and their brother to prevent anything, anything untoward. So that's what's happened here. Plus the fact that they've got so much weapons and they want to create new ones all the time. They give the old weapons, which are pretty new, to the local police forces. It's just as Colleen Raleigh had predicted.
And they keep talking about peace while they're gathering up, all their rubber bullets and their, gas canisters and, all in the name of peace.
Catherine, I think we ought to call a spade, so to speak.
Oh, yeah. I'm
all
for that.
Original sin, racism. And racism has not been eradicated, even though it's been 50 years since Dr. King won the Nobel Prize. We have a lot of work to do, and it's up to us privileged whites.
And the for-profit prison system that they want to keep going also.
That's it, yeah.
So again, we're running out of time. It's just about at the top of the hour. So again, come and see Ray McGovern this Saturday, New York City, the All Souls Church, 80th and Lexington Avenue, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Talking about the 28 pages, missing 28 pages that could most definitely say that they had advanced knowledge of 9/11. So thank you, Ray McGovern. We'll be back after this break with Dr. Seth Farber and Jeff Levine, who are dealing with the abuse of the mental health industry here in the New York, New Jersey area. So please don't go away after the break. Thank you, Ray McGovern.
Most welcome.
Have a great night.
Mm-hmm.
Wake up!
revolution of consciousness begins here at Awake Radio.
You're listening to Awake Radio, straight talk for the awake and aware.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Near the entrance. Has a shotgun. White male, 30s, long hair.
Mama don't like tattletales.
Wearing sunglasses.
Tune in to awakeradio.us, awakeradio.uk. Do you have your dark glasses on?
Dust is all that's left of us.
of sound, a dimension in sight, a dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the awake zone. You're tuned into Awake Radio, unlocking your mind to the ideas that the imagination is waiting for. awakeradio.us, surrounded the White House. Over.
Copy. We are in position. Over.
Copy. The whole administration is being ordered to step down. Over.
Copy. Wait, looks like they're exiting the White House. Over.
Copy. Obama and the First Lady? Over.
Copy, yes. And all of the rest. Joe Biden, Pelosi, looks like Feinstein and even Hillary. And they all have their hands up. Over.
And copy. Looks like we have won. Welcome to Awake Radio, straight talk for the awake and the aware.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. And I'm feeling good.